when you're in a high demand religion, you are doing things for blessings. Go and do this and you'll be blessed for it. Go and do this and you're going to get a blessing for this. And again, it goes back to what I said. The belief is you are accruing points, if you will, for the next life by what you're doing in this life. And if you do everything you're asked to do as a member of the Mormon faith, then you're going to live in the celestial kingdom. That's the highest of the kingdoms. You have the telestial, the terrestrial, and the celestial. Only in the celestial can you be married and live as a family. Of course, the thing they don't talk about a whole lot is you got a big family because they believe in polygamy in the celestial kingdom. So even though they might not talk about it now and the Mormon faith no longer believes in polygamy here, they still believe in it in the next life.
Hey gang, I'm Nikki LaCroce, and today I'm sharing the mic with Larry Camp. Larry's the host of the podcast Nobody Knows Your Story and author of the memoir Nobody Knows. They Just Want You to Think You Do. Oh, sorry. They just want you to think they do.
That's right.
I was very lucky to be a guest on Larry's podcast where I opened up about my own personal journey. I'm pretty sure there was crying involved. So if you want to check out our episode, I'll put the link in the show notes. But for the next hour or so, it's Larry's turn to be in the hot seat so he can share his story with us. So welcome to the show, Larry.
Hey, I already know it's going to be fun to be here, but yeah, I'm glad to be here. And I enjoy talking. I enjoy telling my story and just, again, I use that expression, talk story from Hawaii, but yeah, I just got off a cruise to the Caribbean with 12 friends, well, 13 if you count my wife, and I do as a friend. And
that's an important one. I've learned that.
Yeah, she's my best friend. So, but yeah, we took 6 other couples with us, and it was a lot of fun.
The beach time is always a really good place for me to kind of recenter, which I know is also true for you with your connection to Hawaii. It's something that we definitely bonded over, a love of the islands there. And you've definitely integrated that into your show and just sort of the embodiment of your message. What was your first, venture into Hawaii and Hawaiian culture?
Well, the very first part would be watching game shows with my grandmother when I was probably 4, 5, 6 years old. And I specifically remember Let's Make a Deal with Monty Hall. And, at the end of the show or whatever, they would give away some grand prize, and it was quite often a trip to Hawaii. And so they would show, these palm trees in the breeze, and they'd show girls dancing the hula. And I just became enamored with Hawaii. And then I just researched it when I was in grade school and junior high, and I just fell in love with it and never actually went until I was 18 years old. But, I know people that are my age that have still not gone. So I've been pretty
I was going to
lucky.
say, all things considered, to have had that love and interest at an early age and then being able to go by the time you were 18, I think is pretty amazing. And so, what was it like for you? I guess, first of all, what inspired you? Like, was there a moment where you're like, I'm just doing it. I've got to get there. I love it. Just at least in concept and theory through everything that you knew about it. What was maybe the catalyst for you deciding to take that trip in the first place?
Well, my family decided that they were going to go and take an extended family trip, and they picked Hawaii, which I was fine with. And
so that worked out great for you.
Yeah, and we went for a month. So who gets to do that on their first time to go to Hawaii? I actually turned 19 during that month that we were there, and we rented some compound that they tore down like 2 years later. It was on its last legs, but it was fun. You'd get up in the night or in the morning and see a scorpion on the floor. It was very rural, but it was right by the water. You could throw a rock in the water from the building that we were in. But,
what island were you on?
We were on Oahu, North Shore. If anybody knows that part of the island of Oahu, it was between Laie and Kahuku out on the North Shore. So very rural, remote. I had to go down a road for about quarter of a mile just to find the place. But it was a lot of fun. And we would walk, no joke, like a half a mile to get to this beach because there was water right outside, but it was coral and you couldn't really do anything. So we would walk a half mile, body surf, boogie board, whatever, for a couple of hours, come back, have lunch, and go back and do it again in the afternoon. And we did this for like a month. And it was during that month, and we did cultural things because, again, we had the whole family there. So we went to Pearl Harbor and we went to the Punch Bowl and it was summertime, so we were able to go to places like Waimea Bay, Sunset Beach, the Pipeline. And I say summertime because in the winter, you get 20, 30-foot waves there and you can't go in, but
I was
it's
going to say
called
that's where the
Waimea
pros go in the
Bay and it
winter.
is a bay in the summer. It's very calm. So
Yeah.
yeah, a lot of fun, a lot of fun. That was when puka shell necklaces were all the rage. This was in 1975. And so
Well, it had
we
to be
would
the
go out
70s
and
or the 90s because puka shells came back for a hot minute there.
yeah. And we would go out and, we'd get like a strainer and go into the sand out in the water and straining. We'd look for these shells and then we'd come back and we'd get like an ice pick and a little hammer and hammer out the center and put them on fishing string with a fastener. And then we had these puka shell necklaces. It was pretty awesome. So we found things to do. We had no television. I know that sounds pretty crazy for people today. Can you imagine a month? No television, no social media, no cell phones back then. So
I
it
feel
was
like
just strictly having fun in Hawaii.
Well, I feel like if you're going to be somewhere where the absence of technology exists, for me at least personally, it needs to be somewhere where you have the opportunity to be out in nature. I prefer more oceanic or waterfront varieties of nature. But I think in general, because there is this natural desire to connect with the earth and really embrace that sense of things, it's something that I wish we did more now. You see people, to your point, we go and we have maybe a long weekend like I'm describing, or a week, a lot of times at best it's a week or a couple of weeks, but to really be able to soak it in and feel part of it, and feel, familiar with a culture is very powerful. And not even necessarily just in the whole natural earth aspect of it, but travel anywhere. I mean, I spent 3 months abroad in Italy when I was a junior in college. And I remember when we were going to the airport, my mom really emphasizing, this is like, oh, this is a once in a lifetime opportunity that you have. Most people aren't going to be able to, just kind of flit off and take a few months and go live in another country and embrace the culture in that way. And so I was very intentional about that at the time. I mean, I was still in my early 20s, so I'm sure I made plenty of bad decisions and wasted some time that could have been better spent. But I think it's really amazing when you have the opportunity to step away from your comfort zone and go to places that spark either inspiration, joy, all of the above. And it familiarizes you with yourself a bit more. I mean, as I said when we started this, one of the things that really resonates in the work that you're doing and how you show up is your love of Hawaiian culture. So was it on that trip where it really expanded into, that way that you show up, or was it sort of an evolution over time where you continue to collect memories there and build on that?
Probably a little of both. I remember when they opened the plane door. This is back in the day where the planes would, land and then you'd walk down the stairs. They didn't
Hmm.
have, where you go into the terminals the way they do now. And I remember them opening the door in that humidity and that air coming in. And I turned to my cousin who was right next to me. I said, "I'm going to live here someday." And he just laughed or whatever. But during that month that we were there, yeah, the culture, the music. We made some local friends that we just met at the beach, and yeah, I knew right then that someday I was going to live in Hawaii. I didn't know when it would be or whatever, but I just have always loved the culture. And I should say that I grew up. I was lucky. I grew up along in beachy areas like Laguna Beach, California, San Diego. So I had a lot of ocean opportunities prior to Hawaii. Um, but not warm water like Hawaii. And
Yeah,
I
that's true. That
prefer
is a
that
big
now. I'm kind of a
difference.
wuss when it comes to cold water. So,
Yeah, that's a good point. I was going to ask where you grew up because I couldn't recall. Remind me where you're located now.
so I'm in very southern Utah, about 2 hours from Las
Okay.
Vegas.
Okay. I thought it was Utah. So when I actually think this could be a decent way of segueing from your Hawaiian, your admiration of Hawaiian culture and your embodiment of Hawaiian culture, in the contrast that has with your, correct me if I'm wrong, you grew up Mormon, correct?
Yes. Yep.
Okay.
Sure did.
So I can't, as somebody who's an objective observer, can't imagine a much more significant contrast of sort of the island vibe, come as you are, chillness that Hawaii represents.
Right.
And then the very rigid, conformist, as we were talking about before we led into this, controlled environment of Mormonism. So what was it like for you? Did you feel that contrast, between how you were raised and going to this place? Like, was there a sense of freedom that you sensed?
Yeah, I think when you grow up in a high demand religion with a lot of rules uh, and I've talked to you about some of the rules. I mean, some of them are silly, especially now that I'm no longer Mormon. I look back and I'm like, I can't believe I actually went along with that. But, you know, hey, it's, I was born into it, right? I mean, most people are the religion of their parents, and that was my case.
Yeah,
But,
same.
but yeah, certainly I always felt like I was at odds though with what the church leaders wanted from a young person. I mean, they didn't want me to have long hair. They didn't want me to like rock and roll music.
In the
They,
70s.
yeah. So, I mean, so of course I like rock and roll music. I had long hair. So, I mean, they would have viewed me as somebody straying from the path, but they just try and take away your individuality and your ability to make choices for yourself. And we used a term growing up called free agency. And as I got older, the Mormon faith seemed to want more control. And so now they don't even really use the term free agency anymore. They now, judge you based on your obedience to what they're asking of you. So yeah, I was at odds at times. There's no doubt about it. And of course, if you're part of any high demand religion, then they want to control many aspects of your life. As a matter of fact, Stephen Hassan wrote a book called The BITE Model. And if you just look at that acronym, BITE, B would stand for behavior, I would be information, T would be thoughts, and E would be emotion. And let me tell you, they try and control all four of those.
Mm. Interesting. So I'm curious, how long ago did you, I guess, leave Mormonism would be decide that you weren't going to be Mormon anymore?
Yeah.
Because and by the way, I actually feel like I'm a little hesitant to use the phrase "be" because it's like, as you said, you were born into a religion. There wasn't autonomy in that choice, so it's more like, when did you make the decision to extract yourself from a religion that didn't align with who you are?
I think for me, it was kind of a gradual process. As I got older, kind of out of the influence of my parents, and I've always liked to learn things. I've always been curious, and I've always been somebody who will choose facts over faith or whatever. So as I got older and I started to see things that I didn't really align with, for example, growing up, blacks could not be participants in our faith. Not in, well, for example, the men couldn't hold the priesthood. They couldn't go to the temples. Uh, they couldn't have certain ordinances performed, like marriage in the temple and different things like that. And that always kind of bothered me. Now they changed that in 1978, but it was that way for over 100 years. But that kind of bothered me, not so much in my youth because I didn't think about it. I didn't even really know
Yeah.
about it. You don't know about a lot of the things because you're not involved in them. But as I started to become a teenager and thinking about it and seeing friends and having black friends and thinking, what? That's a good guy, man. He can't belong. I mean, anyway, bothered me. And then, of course, I mentioned this to you. I have a sister who came out to me and told me that she was lesbian. And um, I'm not sure I know of any high demand religion that doesn't frown on that. So
Yeah.
they excommunicated my sister and my sister's wife now. They've been married for like 28 years. And so
Was your sister's wife also part of the Mormon
yep,
church?
they both got excommunicated. Yeah.
Which,
So
by the way, that word in and of itself just
I
sounds so
know.
freaking terrible. It's like,
I know.
like that feels like it's the antithesis of what any religion claims to preach.
Yeah, you would think that because religions for the most part are businesses. I mean, if I use the term Mormon because that's what we were called when I was growing up, they now like to emphasize their full name, which is the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And if you look at how it's actually called the Corporation of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, because it is a corporation. And you would think that, as if you view members as shareholders or stockholders or whatever that you would want to be inviting in to anyone. But it's a slippery slope for those folks, because sometimes they attract people for the very reason of, oh, you don't allow gay people. Okay, then I'm with you.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's the things that might be appalling to me might be
appealing to somebody
acceptable
else.
and appealing to somebody else. Yeah, 100%. So back to your question about when I left. Like I say, gradually over time, the only thing that was kind of keeping me in was I was, of course, taught that Joseph Smith had certain things happen, that he had a revelation, that he went and prayed, and that he saw God and Jesus Christ, and they appeared to him, and they told him these things. Again, looking at it now, it's hard to imagine I ever believed that. But again, you're taught from your youth, and you believe it until you don't. And for me, it took my daughter coming home from college in 2016, so it wasn't that long ago, that she said, "Hey, we've been studying these things called the essays. Have you heard of them?" I said, "No." She goes, "Yeah, we've been studying them." And I should say she was at a church-owned school. So she was at Brigham Young University, Hawaii campus. They have a campus in Hawaii. And she says, "Yeah, we've been studying them. And man, they're very different from what we were taught growing up." And I said, "I'm going to look into them." So right there, that makes me different than a lot of people, because as members of the Mormon faith, you were told not to look at anything that wasn't approved by the church. It's pretty convenient, but they own their own bookstores, so Deseret Bookstore, so you could go and buy any book in there, but you weren't supposed to read anything that was anti-Mormon or anything like that. But
or be
my
curious.
daughter was quick to say, yes, exactly. And my daughter was quick to say, these are put out by the church, though. So I thought, hey, no harm there, right? So the next Sunday, she'd gone off back to school. Well, I should say that she then went on to tell us that she no longer believed in the church, because she took a deep dive and got onto the internet, and again, facts
Good
over
for
faith.
her, though.
So she
Good
was,
for
so she
her.
was choosing facts and factual information that she found on the internet. And so, yeah, she was, tearful when she's telling us this, because she didn't know how we would react. But of course, we loved her. I mean, I could never imagine loving my faith more than my child. I mean, I think some might choose otherwise, but would never be my case, and nor Judy. So we supported our daughter. We just said, hey, look, you're in the last few months of your senior year. Don't share this with other folks, because you don't want to get booted out and have 4 years go down the drain. So she just had to kind of keep that on the down low. But it gave me, I feel like, the permission to then do a little exploring. After I read those essays, she was right, vastly different. I got on and looked on the internet, and I'm talking just a few hours, and was it. So when people say, what took you out of Mormonism? I say, Google.
Yeah. And meanwhile, the church is like, Google nothing. Yeah. Well, I love that. I thank you for sharing that. And especially because I think there's a lot that really comes out of that. First of all, you obviously raised your daughter in a way that she knew that she had the freedom, at least within your home, to be able to understand, I'm allowed to think critically. I can think for myself. I have the choice there, right? It's interesting when I think about you saying like she didn't know how you would react. It's like that was the feeling that I got when I was coming out to my parents. So it's almost like it's like it's a very it's a sense of exposure, a fear of how will somebody respond to this thing that I'm telling them that now makes me different than them in some way. Whether it's actually different or the perceived sense of differentiation, you don't want to be isolated. Obviously, you have a good relationship with your daughter from what you've said. You and your wife care deeply about her and your other children. So it was probably for her in that moment, I imagine, this contrast of something feels off. This isn't right for me anymore. And for me to be able to actually embody that and live towards that truth, then I also need to share this with these people, my parents in my life who care about me. And I find it really fascinating that you mentioned they were teaching something sort of differently than what had been taught in in your church, was it different in the sense that it made you question like, oh, this is inconsistent, therefore I want to validate like what actually is going on? Or was it like one of those things felt like it was a more, um, I don't know, maybe reasonable explanation for things? Like what was the difference in those two things? Like what did that spark? Was it just the why are they different? Or was it this is different in a way that I would prefer to believe or not believe?
I think that they came out with the essays because when somebody says something in the 1800s that they saw God or whatever, or even now, I could say, "Oh, hey, Nikki, since I saw you last, I saw God," and you could believe me or not, but
Yep.
there were lots of things that were said in those early days. The church was organized on April 6, 1830, so you can see that's a long time ago. Things that were said that now can be verified. And so things were coming out. And so the church had to I think they wanted to get ahead of it in a way. And so they started teaching this to the younger generation, like the kids in college. And when you're in high school, you go to something called seminary.
Hmm.
And it's usually an hour a day, Monday through Friday. If you live in a place like Utah, they actually have what they call release time. So it's like a class in your high school. You walk across the street and they have a building and you go to that. But for me, I was in San Diego when I started seminary. And so we got up at like 5 a.m. and went before school. So, it was just one more part of being dedicated. But so they started teaching these younger people the information that was now accessible via the internet. So I personally don't think if it hadn't been out there, if we didn't have the internet, they probably wouldn't have even come up with these truthful facts. But now the truthful facts, which contradicted many of the things that I was taught and that I taught. See, I went 2 years on a full-time Mormon mission and taught people knocking on doors like, "Hey, I'm from the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. God has sent us to your door with an important message." Well, what I was really doing, right, was I'm recruiting for the corporation. More people in, because we pay 10% of our income to the church. That's a lot of money. I mean, they're worth over $200 billion. They're one of the largest corporations in well, America for sure, if not the world. So the fact is that the very first thing I read of the essays, there's 11 essays, and the very first one I read was called Joseph Smith and the First Vision. And basically, the church uses a version that came out in 1838. But in this essay, it talks about there's one handwritten version of his experience in the sacred grove. It was written in 1832 by Joseph Smith. And in that version, it is completely different than the version the church uses now. I mean, important things like he says he went not the version that the church teaches now is that Joseph went there to ask which church was true, and that God and Jesus appeared to him and said, "None of the churches are true. They draw near to me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me." That's like a direct quote. Well, in the actual 1832 version, he says he never went there to ask which church to join. He just wanted to be forgiven of his sins. And he says that God appeared to him. So not God and Jesus, just God. So, I mean, these might not seem like big things, but when you've taught this as a missionary for 2 years and you've been told this your whole life, there's a big difference to me between seeing God and then seeing God in Jesus and going to find out what church was true and just to ask for remission of your sins. And so I could see that what was happening here, and it doesn't take a genius to figure it out. As Joseph went along, he changed the narrative so that he could then implement other aspects. He brought into it polygamy. He brought into it, this belief in the Book of Mormon, which and see, that was another big one. I mean, because again, we were told from the time that we were little children that Joseph went and was guided by an angel to find golden plates hidden in a hill, the Hill Cumorah in upstate New York, and that he translated these golden plates into the Book of Mormon. Well, now what the church teaches today is that Joseph stuck his head into a hat. There was a stone in the bottom of that hat, and that the words appeared on the stone. So they don't even talk about him translating the golden plates anymore. So I know this sounds so silly to anybody who's not was not brought up in the religion or doesn't know about it. But again, when you start to see all the things that you were taught being changed and the whole narrative being changed and going away from free agency to obedience, and man, I just feel like they're just a large version of some of these smaller cults that we're familiar with. And
Oh, for sure.
I mean, and we watch them all the time. We just started watching one on Hulu last night. It's about the LeBarons, who were a Mormon breakoff splinter group that went nutso. But the one thing they all have in common is a male prophet who wants power, glory, money, and women.
It's almost shocking how much people can get away with given how much information there is available now.
Yeah.
I watch a lot of documentary content, and I've watched a lot on FLDS, and I saw that you actually had one of, was it Warren Jeff's wife
Hmm.
on your show, and
Yeah. His
I
65th wife.
like, ew, I just, oh God, he's so gross. And beyond the just sheer ridiculousness of the fact that you're tailoring everybody around you, like to cater to you, like everything that you're doing, even with this guy being in jail, being like, no, but this is the divine message that I'm still getting. Meanwhile, they caught him like on a bender in Vegas when they got him, like when he was on the most wanted list. It's like there, that alone should be able to show you that this person is not practicing what they're preaching. So why are you obligated to that belief system when they're not obligated to that belief system? And by the way, just even using the term obligated, because nobody should be obligated to it. Spirituality, religion, what you believe, what you have faith in, I feel should be a choice. And similar to you, like I grew up Catholic. It wasn't until probably honestly less than a month ago, I had a conversation with my wife and I said, I think I have a real problem with the fact that I was raised Catholic, but not in a way where it's like I didn't have some real obvious religious trauma where it was extreme. But it was basic, right? We were Christmas, Easter people mostly, but I had to go through all the sacraments. You're baptized as a baby, so you have no choice over that. You go do your communion and then you get your confirmation, which makes you an adult in the eyes of the church at age 12. You have to do confession, which is like, I think I was 7 or 8 when confession started. And I'm like having this revelation as I'm talking to Nicole, and I'm like, I think that's traumatic for me now that I'm talking about it. I think that it's not okay that I felt intimidated to have to explain things to somebody I didn't know who's in this position of power, telling me that I can be forgiven for my sins. And it's like, it just, I realize it's a little tangenty, but it's like the whole concept of religious control eludes me so much because I can't grasp how in the information age it's perpetuating so much, except for the fact that there's so much misinformation that can proliferate along with actual facts. So what you're explaining in your experience and your experience with your daughter is like you verified, right? It's like trust but verify. So like
Yeah.
you're like you question it. You're like, okay, I can see that this is very clearly the information that is accurate because there is a choice that you make in what you believe ultimately, but there also are facts. And a lot of people don't make the effort to decide if what they believe is rooted in who they are and what they genuinely feel to be true to them, or if it's just what they're told. And growing up, that was very much what it was like for me. And I remember the moments when we'd be going to church primarily on Christmas Eve, like when I would be back from college. And I got to a point where I was like, I know you guys are going to be mad at me for saying this, but like, I don't want to come. Like, I don't want, I'll, then eventually we started like going for drinks and appetizers at the Four Seasons before we would go to church in Philly, which I liked because then I just called it pre-gaming for Jesus and I got a little drunk and dealt with the fact that I had to sit there for an hour and a half. And I just marveled at the beauty of the basilica and let that be what it was. But, I think that it's hard for us to challenge that belief system when it's embedded in you. And it's interesting for me, Larry, because of how we met, because of the conversations that we've had, to think about you in a situation where you're door knocking, effectively preaching to people the good word and being like, come join us, won't you? Like, what do you feel drastically different in who you are as a person now because you've transitioned away from that? Or do you feel like the core of who you are, because it seems to me purely observational, obviously, that like the way you describe how you were when you were younger and your awareness and your compassion for other people, it feels like maybe it was more of a shedding of this part of yourself that allowed the rest of you to like really come through. Would you say that's fairly accurate?
I feel like I'm the same person. People ask me that, hey, how are you different now that you're no longer practicing Mormon? I say, I'm no different at all. I'm the same person. Part of that was because I was probably never the version of a Mormon person that the church would want. I attended, but I was like a lot of people who were there with questions, and
Mm,
they didn't have answers. And to the deep questions, they still believe that when you die, you will. Where you go is according to how you live here on Earth, and if you obey all the rules, and they have these temples and you can't go in there unless you're paying 10% to the church. So it's kind of a catch-22. You can't go in and have the saving ordinances performed in the temple unless you qualify to go into the temple, which means you got to be giving them 10% of your money. You've got to, there's a whole list of rules. Trust me. I mean, you can't even
oh,
be
it just
drinking
like it makes
coffee.
me it makes me so angry. Like it's like a visceral feeling of it, it's like I can't even really say it's rage, but it's like this feeling of just pure disappointment in humanity that we would take advantage of each other like that.
hmm Yeah,
Like
that's a good way
what
to
a
put it,
shame.
because they will tell you that they are trying to go back to the 1800s when missionaries first arrived in Hawaii. So the people were, hundreds of thousands of Hawaiians, and they were happy, and they'd been there for hundreds of years. Their great King Kamehameha had just died the year before, and the missionaries land, and they start immediately. They've got to save these heathens, and they made the women cover up and start wearing all this clothing, and they weren't used to it, so they were sweating a lot more and this and that, and then they brought diseases. And so within just a short period of time, like 20 to 40 years, I mean, they were down to like 20% of the original population. It didn't take long. And all during this time, and I'm just talking about Hawaii, this went on everywhere. There's just this feeling of, we have the truth and we want to give it to everybody else. And it doesn't matter
Except
if,
it's not the truth.
well, there you go. And see, you were raised Catholic. I was raised Mormon. My grandfather was raised Methodist. Um, and every single one of the leaders of those faiths will tell you that their church is the only true church. And one of my favorite videos is on YouTube. It's about 11 minutes long, and I just love it. And you just sit there and listen, and you can see like 8 or 9 different religious um, religions represented by someone bearing their testimony with tears in their eyes, saying that they know that the Jehovah Witness religion is the only true religion on the face of the earth, and they have tears streaming down their face. And then they'll cut to a Mormon, same thing. Then a Catholic, same thing. Seventh Day Adventist, same thing. It's like all these different religions, Islam, Muslim, whatever, they're all represented there in this video, and every single one of them is testifying that they know that their belief is the only true one. And
Can you share that link with me after the show so I can put it in the show notes? Because I
I
feel like I'm
will.
also going to
Yeah,
need to
I
see
will.
that.
So, I used to know the name of it and I've just forgotten because I'm old. But
And also, there's just a ton of content. I don't expect people to remember all of it. That's why we can just share things and discover them via
yeah.
show notes at this point.
And because it's only 10 or 11 minutes, we live in this age where people don't want to invest too much time in anything. Like you said, I mean, how much time would it really take to investigate whether or not your religion is true? I mean, really. But you have to question, you have to be able to accept the fact that maybe it's not. And a lot of people
Mm,
don't want to do either of those. So I have family members that they know we're out. They know that I've said to them, I'll talk to you and tell you anything if you want to come to me, but I'm not going to, rock your world if you want to stay in. And a lot of people do. They choose not to question. They choose not to look. And I think sometimes that's personality also. You talked about my daughter. I think if anything, Judy and I have raised our kids to question things and to be curious and to all of my kids loved, you know, when I was raised, it was the encyclopedias, right? We didn't have Google and things like that. But I can remember just sitting there and reading through the encyclopedias, just learning stuff. And,
Yeah.
so I've just always been that way. I think my kids were that way. And if you have that kind of a mindset and you want to know things, then you're going to do some research. I mean, who goes out and buys a pickleball paddle or a pair of running shoes or whatever without doing research? But yet they won't even take the time to research their religious beliefs. They just go with the flow.
That's a really good point. So what I'm hearing is I think we need Yelp reviews about religion.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or
and
like
common
what
sense and just, like you said earlier, you would go, do you really need to go and do these things to have I mean, when you're in a high demand religion, you are doing things for blessings. Go and do this and you'll be blessed for it. Go and do this and you're going to get a blessing for this. And again, it goes back to what I said. The belief is you are accruing points, if you will, for the next life by what you're doing in this life. And if you do everything you're asked to do as a member of the Mormon faith, then you're going to live in the celestial kingdom. That's the highest of the kingdoms. You have the telestial, the terrestrial, and the celestial. Only in the celestial can you be married and live as a family. Of course, the thing they don't talk about a whole lot is you got a big family because they believe in polygamy in the celestial kingdom. So even though they might not talk about it now, and the Mormon faith no longer believes in polygamy here, they still believe in it in the next life.
Mm.
And that's why you'll find the FLDS and some of these groups who still practice polygamy. I've got a person on this one street over from me is a polygamous family. I mean, they're all around. There's some up there. You're in BC, right? There's polygamists up there. I guarantee it. There's huge compounds of break off Mormon polygamous groups in Alberta and in that area. So, I mean, they're all over the place. Oh yeah.
I mean, I believe
Tens
it.
of
I feel
thousands
like
of them.
So I'm curious because I feel like you may have, when we had first met, I feel like you may have mentioned not living in Utah recently. Did you move back to Utah somewhat recently?
Yeah, we'd been away since 1983 and we returned about 5 years ago.
Was there any hesitation to go back to Utah, just given the nature of the community being such a densely populated Mormon area?
So Utah is not like it was. I mean, it's Salt Lake City's not even 50% Mormon anymore. So, I mean, it's changing. Yeah, here in our area, it's still highly LDS, meaning that and that's another, acronym they use, LDS, Latter-day Saints. So it's about 2/3. But out here where I live in my area, if I think we got like 12 homes on our street. I think there's 3 that are Mormon. So, and even in Mormonism, there's different, think of yourself as being Catholic. You said you were like Easter and Christmas Catholics or whatever. I've got a buddy I play softball with who's Catholic. I mean, he is devout and he goes and does things daily. So, I mean, you have that with Mormonism too. You have some people who are less zealous, I guess, or committed
Varying
to the cause.
degrees.
Yeah. And that's kind of how I had grown to be over time. And I mentioned a few of the things like the blacks in the priesthood or the LGBTQ views, or even the word of wisdom, where they will not let you attend the temple and do this if you're drinking coffee or, alcohol or chewing tobacco or drinking tea. I mean, some of the rules just became ridiculous. And as they would get new prophets, these new prophets sometimes would institute new things. So yeah, was it a concern to us to move back to Utah after being gone for so long? A little bit, but we moved here because we love to hike, we love to bike, I play softball year round. This is an area where, I mean, I just came from softball this morning. So, I mean, I played a game yesterday. So we can do this year round, and that's why we moved here. Also, location. It's about 4 hours from Salt Lake City, 6 hours from the beach in California, 7 hours from Phoenix, where we spent 20 plus years. And so for us, it was very conveniently located so that we would get lots of friends and family passing through. And we've been here 5 years, and that's been the case.
Oh, that's really nice. Yeah, that's I think Definitely makes a lot of sense. I know you and I both have shared the sentiment that the value of life really comes from those relationships and those connections, and that time together. So I want to ask a question real quick because you said as they get new prophets, I take issue with the fact that they're like just accruing them now, because anybody can be a prophet, I suppose, if you believe it enough and you tout it enough. What does it mean? Like, how does that show up in the way that people are practicing? I mean, is it just sort of a you buy into it because you're part of this religion and therefore you're just like, okay, well, here's another prophet? Like, to me, that would make me question it. I'd be like, why, where did they come from? Where we're just like, we got a new one now?
Yeah, there's rules, as you can imagine. There's a rule to become pope, and there's rules to become the prophet or leader of the president of the Mormon church. So the way they do it here is it's all through seniority. So you are ordained an apostle, right? You have
Hmm.
apostle, you have the leader or the prophet or the president of the church, and then you have 12 apostles. So if you and I were, well, sorry, you can't because you're a girl. But if you were a
And also
male,
probably because I'm gay, it probably would just really
yeah,
ousts me.
you're
They're like,
out
we
on a
don't
couple of
want you.
counts. But yeah, you have to be a male and in good standing, and you know, if you're gay, you better keep it to yourself, I guess. So because I'm sure that's happened,
Oh,
but
for sure.
especially in years gone by. But yeah, so I mean, if they need to fill two slots, and you know, two people are called, and they say, well, Brother Camp, we're going to set you apart, and then we're going to set apart Brother LaCroce over here next, and then over the years, people die off because that's how it is. The guy who's the head of the Mormon Church right now is 99 years old. I mean, think of that. Talk about being out of touch with reality.
It's like the Senate.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. And see, what's happening is as people are living longer and longer, these guys are getting older and older. So the two guys under him, one's like 92 and the other one's like 90. So I mean, all three of these guys that are next in line are like 90 plus. So they're just so out of touch. But they have,
They lack
it's
relevance.
yeah. But to be honest with you, I mean, if we're just being truthful here, they are more symbolic in their positions than
Figureheads.
really anything else. I mean, and they're supposed to be prophets, seers, and revelators, but they don't. They have no revelations. They don't have any prophecies. I mean, nothing that's yeah, and nobody has for years and years. If saying you can't, that it's okay to, we don't want to be called Mormons anymore. We want to have you use the full name, Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. That's what this last guy, that's his big deal. So in the 7 or 8 years he's been in as leader, he's come up with nothing. I mean, but what could he do? I mean, because everything now is verifiable. So I mean, even if he was to say something like, "Oh, we're in the last days," well, okay, people have been saying that for 2,000 years, right?
Yeah, and the most recent in 2000 didn't happen, so I'm feeling pretty good. We made it through the last one.
Yeah. So that's how they become prophet, though, of the church. It's just all seniority, and it's
Okay.
by the date that you were put in and made an apostle. And if you live long enough, because a lot of them don't, a lot of them might get to 86 and die.
Mhm.
But if you live long enough, then you will be the prophet.
That's I'm pretty sure that's not how it's supposed to work when it comes to prophecy, but that's fine.
Yeah.
They're like, no, just it's a promotion. So you've gotten promoted to prophet is what I'm hearing.
Yeah. So I mean, because it was a part of my life for 60 years. I mean, it's not like you just go away and like, well, you can leave the church, but you can't leave it alone. That's one thing that people will say sometimes. And I'm like, well, I wouldn't leave anything alone that was a big part of my life for 60 years just because maybe I no longer participate. But there's also a part of me that likes, I mean, maybe there's one person listening to this, Nikki, that's a member, that's a Mormon right now, that I've said something that will make them at least question. And if that's happened, then wonderful.
Yeah.
Because that's
Yeah.
all I'm really hoping for is just take a look yourself. Don't believe in what I say if you don't want to, but at least look, at least do the research,
Yeah, be curious
because
enough to know.
I know people who have heard about the essays, or they've heard about the CES letter, which was a book that was written with answers to all these questions,
Mhm.
and they'll take it upon themselves to read this to prove it wrong. And what's happened is it's proved that they were wrong, and that
I feel like
now
that's
they've
the
left the
best,
church.
though. I feel like that's the best. That's the best way for it to happen. We have a little bit more time here, and I appreciate this conversation because I think it's extremely valuable and extremely informative. Thank you.
Hmm.
If you're okay, I'd like to switch gears a little bit
Sure.
into another part of your life that, excuse me, I think we shared a bit on your show is grief and loss. Like I'm
Hmm.
definitely pivoting here. So I know that we're kind of like really shifting. When I was on your show and I mentioned in the beginning of this episode, I'm pretty sure I cried. I remember listening back and I was having a moment really remembering my mom and what happened when she passed away. And I feel like when we are, forced to kind of confront loss, there is also this sense of what do I believe? Why do I believe what I believe? And how can I connect more with my sense of sort of universal spirituality to be able to still remain close to somebody that I've lost? And so I know that um, you lost your son, I think was in 2018.
Correct. Yep. 2018.
And and it was very sudden, which it was with my mom as well. So what was that like for you overall as a parent losing a child, but also did you feel any call back to the belief system that you've grown up with, or did that inspire you at all to explore like other ways to kind of connect to spirituality and your son?
And that's a great question, and I'll tell you this. And everybody deals with grief differently. I don't think there's any one way or one right or wrong way. Um, my son died of a spontaneous dissection of the right iliac artery, which meant that he grabbed his stomach and collapsed, was rushed to the hospital, and was gone within an hour. So I was not even in town. I was at a softball tournament. My wife was in Hawaii. Uh, our daughter Tatum was just having our first grandchild. So, and he was in Phoenix, Arizona. So, I mean, I got there the next day, but I mean, so yeah, it was it's the thing that no parent wants to ever experience. And if I was still Mormon at the time, I'm sure I would have handled it a little bit differently. And what I mean by that is, um, in the Mormon faith, when you pass on, or I guess one of the big beliefs is that you will be reunited after this life. And so that gives a lot of comfort, I think, when you lose a parent or you lose a child or you lose a spouse, to know that you'll be reunited if you just live the principles and do what you're supposed to do. You can be reunited. But because I no longer believed that, I now operate under the belief system that nobody knows. And, I come back to that a lot of times. And oh, it's kind of a little twinkle in my eye when I say it. And I've got a tattoo that says nobody knows. But it's really what I firmly believe. I just don't know. I hope there's something. I think it would be
Yeah,
awesome to
same.
see my son again, my brother Jeff, who passed away at 28, my parents, Judy's parents, who I love very much. Um, be awesome to see them again. But I don't know if I will. So how do I live my life now? Um, I just try and be a good person with no thought of receiving blessings or that I'm going to be elevated to a higher heaven, if you will. I just do it because it's the right thing to do, and treat people kindly. And, if I see an older person that needs help getting into by holding the door open or something, you just do it. It's not hard. And I don't think that, I think a lot of people operate under that same um, system that I do and that Judy does now. And so, but yeah, our son Dusty, losing him was just a traumatic event. I think about him every day. Um, I think sometimes there's a tendency maybe to uh, emulate people who have passed on, and sometimes like, well, hold on now, that was Dusty. He wasn't perfect, and that's true. But at the end of the day, he was a great son, and we certainly miss him. And he had just gotten married, and was so excited to be an uncle because our it had just been 5 days that our granddaughter was born before he passed, and just so I think a lot of times, especially when you lose a child, you're grieving at the loss, but you're also grieving at the loss of that future that child would have had.
Yeah, I get that a lot. One of my good friends passed away when I was 16 and I'm still friends with his parents and I see, like he's kind of frozen in time, at the age
Hmm.
of 16 and you don't know what their life could have been. And it's, I think, interesting to kind of have those moments where you speculate a little bit what it might have been like. With my mom, obviously not the loss of my child, but it was so sudden. And my sister, the day my mom passed away, it was literally the week that, like, it was my niece's birthday, which is also my parents' anniversary. She passed away the following day, then my brother-in-law's birthday, and then my nephew's birthday was the day of her funeral, and it was his first birthday. So that feeling of she's not here. She's not here, she's not going to see them, not from this plane anyway, grow up and be able to be part of that in the ways that we would want to. And so that feeling of like the missed opportunities, the inability to like have the tangible memories there with them is really challenging. I know that we really try to make sure that my niece and nephew know about my mom and share things. And it's like, it's nice because there's more video content of her, not a ton, but there's still more video content of her now versus when we were kids and both my mom's parents had passed away. And it wasn't until a few years ago that she gave my sister and I a copy of some audio recording she had from when she was 21. She had like some random piece of equipment that did this in like the early 70s. And she shared it with us. And I said, all the years you talked about Nana and Grandpa Harry, never once did I think, even though I knew you're from New York, never once did I think to put New York accents on them. Never once. And so it was really interesting to just, be able to connect in a way where like it's family, and so you feel that sense of community even when they're not there, and I think it's really valuable to be able to hold those memories in place, the ones that we have, but also share them and, impart some of those memories on the people around us so they get to experience that. And for me, it's been a lot more leaning into spirituality, like sort of on the universal level, because I don't really buy into organized religion. And I feel like for me to have faith, it needs to be in sort of everything's unfolding as it should. And that's been a way for me to find peace, as well as at the time I was leaning more into just kind of listening to content around Zen Buddhism, and Alan Watts comes up a lot when I talk to people on here because it's just like it was this first thing that somebody who was talking about more Eastern philosophy and Western culture. And I remember listening to these lectures and the idea of the impermanence of things, and just that was really instrumental. That was like a very divine time to be listening to something about it's like nothing lasts, and it doesn't make it better, but it at least, to your point, nobody knows. So
Hmm.
at least the thing that we do know is that nothing lasts. So that's what I can sort of embrace and understand that even the worst moments of our life we will get through, and the best moments of our life will also pass. So you kind of, to your point, show up and be the best version that you can be now. And that's for yourself and that's for everybody around you.
Yeah, and therapy is helpful too. And I've never gone to um, a therapist. I know plenty of people who have, but doing these sessions, talking with you, talking to my guests, I've done 112 or 13 episodes now, and each time I talk with a guest, I feel like I've had some therapy. And one thing I did was, because when you write a book now, it's usually it's what they call print on demand. So they don't print a book. If you go to buy my book on Amazon, it gets printed when you hit the button to buy it.
Yep.
So what that means for an author like myself, I can go in and add to it or change it. And so I did that. The book had come out about a year before Dusty passed away. And so about a year after Dusty passed away, so in 2019, I went in and added a chapter on losing a child into my book. And then I threw a little bonus at the end of it just on everything you wanted to know about Hawaii. But that was just a little throw in. But that chapter that I wrote about losing a child was very therapeutic for me. I waited about a year to do it, and but it was good. And I think sometimes just even mentioning his name is a way of honoring him to me and keeping his memory alive. I guess that's more a correct term. But because I don't want, when your son passes away like he did, oh, all kinds of people came out and this and that, but they get on with their lives, which is expected. But we're left with that hole, and we're left with that. And so I have many friends now, unfortunately, who've experienced the same thing. I have a really good friend who lost both of her children at different times, but so I think there's a tendency to think, woe is me. Why is my life so difficult? I've had this problem and that problem. But all you have to do is sit down. And again, I'm using here, you can see in my little quotes here. I'm I'm saying talk story with somebody for 15 minutes or an hour, and you're going to find, there's people that have had it a lot worse than we have. And you just don't know about it because you don't know their story.
Yeah. Oh, wow. What a great way to round out the episode, Larry. I, as always, love chatting with you. The other thing that I will say that I haven't said yet, but I just need to acknowledge because I sort of, because we hadn't chatted in a while, you just have the best radio voice, like the best podcast voice. I feel like I'm immediately like, all you have to do is say hi. And I'm like, yes, let's do this. On top of the fact that your story is really engaging, you're introspective, and you're inviting of those stories. It's incredible to have the opportunity to share the mic with you again and just to know you, Larry. And I appreciate all that you're doing to put out more good and share other people's stories in the world. And so, gang, you can catch Larry's episodes of his podcast, No One Knows Your Story, wherever you listen. But Larry, is there anywhere else that you want people to follow you?
No, I just do this for fun. It's just a therapeutic, right? And,
Yeah.
and thank you for those kind remarks. I mean, that was very nice of you to say. But yeah, and you're a fun person to visit with too. I mean, that's the other part that comes out of this, Nikki, is that in these 112 or 13 episodes that I've done, I feel like I've got, now some of these people I already knew, but
Right.
a lot of them I didn't. But man, I've got a lot more friends now, and
Yes.
and I think that's again, another important part of life for me and for Judy is friends and doing fun things and going places, and even if it's just have somebody over to play cards or whatever it is, or dinner or something. But we now believe that this could be, and most likely is, at least to us, our only life. And let's make the most of it. Let's enjoy it. There's a lot of stuff that, is wrong with the world. And if I can give advice to anybody listening out there, watch less cable news.
Yeah. Yes. I literally was
Take walks, listen to podcasts.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Consume content that fuels, something good in you instead of dragging you down. I think it's good to be aware. It's necessary to be aware.
Sure.
But it's very easy to get mired down. And something my wife said the other day that I love, she's like, nothing fuels my fire more than like my hate love for watching the news. Right. It's like, cause it plays on that, like you recognize what's wrong with the world and then you're mad about it. And so now you're like, we need to do something. You feel empowered, but then we don't do anything. We spiral out.
Yeah.
It's a matter of making sure that you're putting the good things into your life that you need. It's good to be informed, as we've been talking about throughout this entire episode, but, be conscious of where you put your energy. And especially, a lot of people there's a loneliness epidemic and people feel like they don't have people. And as you've said, this podcast has been an amazing way to cultivate more meaningful relationships for me. And my hope is that not only are guests feeling that as well, but also listeners. Like, if you feel inspired by this or any other conversation to go out and, explore the possibilities of new relationships with people, please do that. It is so essential to just your overall well-being, and it will lift you up. Surround yourself with people who bring out the best in you and with people that you respect and admire, because I think we also get stuck in these cycles of hanging out with people because it's convenient and not because like they really align with where we are as a person. It's not always just we have this thing that we do in common. It needs to be more than that.
Can I just say, sometimes you might need to cut people loose in your life, because if they're anchoring you and dragging you down, because you're 100% correct. Surround yourself with good people that can bring out the best in you, for sure.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for being one of those people for me, Larry. I appreciate you so much. Gang, that's all for this episode, and we'll catch you on the flip side. Gang, thanks so much for joining me for this week's episode. I just appreciate your support, and it means so much to me that you tune in week after week. The best thing that you can do to help spread the word about the podcast is, if this episode resonated with you, go ahead and share it with somebody else wherever you listen to your podcasts, or you can go ahead and subscribe to my YouTube channel and share it from there. I also really appreciate it if you can leave a review on Apple Podcasts, because that really helps give people a better understanding of what the show's about and what you appreciate about the conversations that we're having.